A lonely businessman is haunted by guilt after an accident left his only son paralyzed, until a barefoot girl appears out of nowhere and makes an impossible promise with just one line. What once sounded crazy turns into hope, and his dark past starts to unravel. If you love great stories, please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're from. Let's continue. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. The autumn wind cut through Lincoln Park with a harsh bite that Michael Harrison barely felt. His hands gripped the handles of his son's wheelchair with mechanical precision, pushing forward along the paved path that wound through Chicago's most prestigious neighborhood. The leaves crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes, creating a rhythm that matched the hollow beating of his heart. Tommy sat silent in his chair, his small frame bundled in a navy blue coat that cost more than most families spent on clothing. In a year. At 9 years old, he possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that had once filled Michael with pride, but now those bright green eyes seemed dulled, staring ahead without the spark that had once made him race through their lakeshore. Drive Mansion laughing with boundless energy. "Would you like to stop by the pond, son?" Michael asked, his voice carrying the careful tone he had perfected over the past 18 months. Every word measured, every syllable designed to avoid the landmines of their shared tragedy. Tommy shrugged, a gesture that had become his primary form of communication. The boy who had once chatted endlessly about dinosaurs, baseball cards, and his dreams of becoming an astronaut now offered only silence and the occasional nod or shake of his head. Michael pushed the wheelchair toward the small pond where ducks glided across the surface, their movements a stark contrast to his son's stillness. He remembered bringing Tommy here before, watching him toss breadcrumbs with wild enthusiasm, squealing with delight when the ducks fought over the treats. Now, Tommy simply watched, his hands folded in his lap, disconnected from the world around him. The accident had changed everything. Michael's mind automatically shied away from the details, as it always did. The specialists had been clear, brutally so. The damage to Tommy's spinal cord was complete. The chances of recovery were non-existent. Those words had echoed through the sterile corridors of Northwestern Memorial Hospital like a sentence of imprisonment. Since then, Michael had spent a fortune trying to prove them wrong. The best neurologists in the country had examined Tommy. They had flown to Switzerland for experimental treatments, to Germany for cutting-edge therapies. Physical therapists had worked with Tommy for months, their optimistic smiles gradually fading as no progress materialized. Each failed attempt had driven another wedge between Michael and the acceptance he refused to embrace. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Elizabeth Conway had told him just last week, her voice gentle but firm, "Tommy is making excellent progress with his upper body strength and coordination. He's adapted remarkably well to his wheelchair. Perhaps it's time to focus on helping him build a fulfilling life as he is, rather than continuing to chase treatments that simply aren't viable." Michael had written her a check and found a new doctor. He always found a new doctor. The truth was he couldn't bear to see his son accept this fate. Every time Tommy navigated his wheelchair with practiced ease, every time he transferred himself to his bed or reached for something without asking for help, Michael felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak that threatened to overwhelm him. His son was adapting, growing stronger in some ways, but Michael couldn't let go of the image of the boy who had run, jumped, and climbed with fearless abandon. A jogger passed them, earbuds in, breathing hard as she maintained her pace. Michael watched her legs pump in steady rhythm and felt the familiar stab of envy and anger. Such a simple thing, putting one foot in front of the other, yet it had become an impossible dream for his child. "Dad," Tommy said quietly, and Michael's attention snapped back to his son. "Can we go home now?" The request was simple enough, but Michael heard the exhaustion in it. These outings, which he insisted upon despite Tommy's obvious reluctance, had become another form of therapy that neither of them enjoyed. Michael told himself they were good for both of them, that fresh air and change of scenery would help. In reality, they only served to highlight everything that had been lost. "Of course," Michael replied, beginning to turn the wheelchair around. "Would you like to stop for hot chocolate on the way back?" "I'm not really hungry," Tommy said, which was his polite way of declining most things these days. As they made their way back toward the park's entrance, Michael's phone buzzed with the familiar cascade of messages from his assistant. Harrison? Industries demanded his attention constantly, and the empire he had built through 2 decades of ruthless determination continued to require his oversight. But lately, even the company that had once been his greatest passion felt like an obligation rather than a calling. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy: a mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, a fleet of luxury cars, a private jet that could take them anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. Yet he would trade it all, every dollar, every asset, every achievement, for the simple gift of seeing his son take a single step. They passed a group of children playing on the playground equipment. Their laughter carried on the wind. Tommy's gaze lingered on them for a moment before he looked away, but not before Michael caught the flash of longing that crossed his features. That look was worse than any of the medical reports, worse than the endless consultations and failed treatments. It was the look of a child who remembered what it felt like to run. Michael quickened his pace, eager to escape the cheerful sounds of childhood that had become a form of torture. He had money, power, influence that reached into the highest levels of government and business, yet he was powerless to give his son the one thing that mattered most. The walk back to their car was filled with the same comfortable silence that had become their default. Tommy had learned not to expect conversation, and Michael had run out of things to say that didn't sound hollow or forced. They moved through the world like 2 people sharing space, but living in separate realities, connected by love but divided by a tragedy that neither could fully process. As Michael helped Tommy transfer from his wheelchair to the passenger seat of their black Mercedes, he caught sight of his son's thin legs, useless beneath the expensive clothes and blankets. The sight filled him with the familiar mixture of grief and rage that had become his constant companions. He folded the wheelchair with practiced efficiency and placed it in the trunk, another routine that had become second nature. Everything about their lives had been restructured around accommodation and adaptation, yet Michael continued to believe that somewhere, somehow, there had to be an answer. The drive home took them through the heart of Chicago, past the towering skyscrapers that housed his business empire, past the restaurants and shops where he had once been a regular customer. Now their world had shrunk to medical appointments, therapy sessions, and the careful choreography of daily life lived from the seat of a wheelchair. Tommy stared out the window as the city passed by, and Michael wondered what thoughts occupied his son's mind during these quiet moments. Did he remember running? Did he dream of walking? Or had he, with the resilience of childhood, already begun to accept what his father refused to acknowledge? The question haunted Michael as they pulled into their circular driveway, where the fountain that Tommy had once loved to run through now stood as another reminder of mobility lost. Soon, they would be back inside their beautiful, perfectly accessible home, where ramps and elevators had replaced stairs, where everything had been modified to accommodate a wheelchair, where they would continue their careful dance around the truth that neither was ready to face. As Michael prepared to help his son from the car, he found himself wondering if there would ever come a day when the weight of silence between them would finally break, or if they were destined to carry this burden forever, 2 people bound by love, but separated by a tragedy that defied every attempt at healing. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Encounter. 3 weeks later, Michael found himself back in Lincoln Park, despite every instinct telling him to find somewhere new for their weekly outing. Tommy had expressed no preference when asked where he wanted to go, offering his usual shrug that had become the universal language of resignation in their household. The November afternoon carried a chill that promised winter's arrival, and Michael had bundled Tommy in layers of expensive wool and cashmere. The boy sat quietly in his wheelchair, occasionally pointing out a squirrel or commenting on the changing colors of the leaves, but these small interactions felt forced, as if he were performing normalcy for his father's benefit. They had settled on a bench near the playground, where Michael pretended to read emails on his phone while actually watching other families enjoy what he and Tommy had lost. A father pushed his daughter on a swing, her delighted squeals echoing across the park. Two boys raced each other across the grass, their competitive shouts filled with the pure joy of movement. Each scene was a small knife twist in Michael's chest. "Dad," Tommy said softly, and Michael looked up from his phone. "There's a girl staring at us." Michael followed his son's gaze and spotted her immediately. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, standing about 20 feet, away beneath an old oak tree. Her clothes were simple, faded jeans with patches on the knees, a grey sweatshirt that had seen better days, and sneakers that were more tape than leather. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there was something in her steady gaze that made Michael uncomfortable. "She's probably just curious about the wheelchair," Michael said, the explanation automatic. They had encountered stares before, everything from pitying glances to uncomfortable avoidance. "Let's move to a different area." But as Michael began to rise from the bench, the girl walked directly toward them. Her steps were measured and purposeful, lacking the typical hesitation of children encountering someone with a disability. She approached them with the kind of confidence that seemed incongruous with her shabby appearance. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice clear and surprisingly mature. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting." Michael's first instinct was protective, suspicion. He had encountered enough people over the past 18 months, well-meaning strangers, religious zealots, and outright charlatans, all claiming they had answers for Tommy's condition. His wallet had been open to enough false promises to make him wary of anyone approaching with unsolicited advice. "We're fine, thank you," he said dismissively, his tone designed to end the conversation before it could begin. "Come on, Tommy. Let's find somewhere quieter." But the girl didn't retreat. Instead, she took another step closer, her eyes shifting from Michael to Tommy. When she looked at his son, something in her expression softened, and Michael saw not pity, but understanding. "Sir," she said, her voice gentle but unwavering, "I can help your son walk again." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. Of all the things he had expected her to say, a request for money, an awkward question about the wheelchair, even some misguided attempt at small talk, this declaration was the most unwelcome. His face flushed with immediate anger. "That's enough," he said sharply, rising to his full height. "I don't know what game you're playing, but we're not interested in whatever you're selling." Tommy, however, had gone very still in his wheelchair. Michael noticed his son's hands gripping the armrests, his green eyes focused intently on the girl's face. There was something in Tommy's expression that Michael hadn't seen in months, a flicker of something that might have been hope. "I'm not selling anything," the girl replied calmly. "And I'm not playing a game. I know it sounds impossible, but I've helped other people learn to walk again, people who were told they never would." Michael's anger flared higher. "Listen, I don't know where you heard about my son's condition, but whatever scheme you're running ends right now. He's been examined by the best doctors in the country. His spinal cord injury is complete. The damage is permanent. So take your false hope and peddle it somewhere else." The harsh words tumbled out of him like a dam bursting. All the frustration of the past 18 months, all the failed treatments and crushing disappointments focused on this girl who dared to offer what every medical expert had declared impossible. But instead of retreating under his verbal assault, the girl simply nodded as if she understood his anger. "I know you've tried everything," she said quietly. "I know you've spent a lot of money and seen a lot of specialists. I know they've all told you the same thing." Her calm acceptance of his fury only made Michael angrier. "Then you know this. Conversation is pointless. Come on, Tommy." Michael moved to push the wheelchair, but Tommy's voice stopped him. "Dad, wait." The two words were spoken with more energy than Tommy had shown in weeks. Michael looked down at his son and saw something. That made his chest tighten. Tommy was sitting straighter in his chair, his eyes bright with an emotion Michael had almost forgotten existed in him. "Please," Tommy said, looking up at his father, "can I just listen to what she has to say?" Michael felt trapped between his paternal instinct to protect Tommy from another disappointment and his son's first show of genuine interest in anything for months. The plea in Tommy's voice was impossible to ignore. even though every rational part of Michael's mind screamed that this was exactly the kind of false hope that had led to so much heartbreak. "Tommy," Michael said carefully, "we've been through this before. Remember Dr. Peterson in California and that clinic in Germany? I don't want you to get your hopes up again." "I know," Tommy said, but his gaze remained fixed on the girl. "But what if she's different? What if this time—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Michael heard the unspoken question, what if this time it was real? The girl stepped closer, her attention focused entirely on Tommy now. "What's your name?" she asked. "Tommy," his son replied, without hesitation. "I'm Sarah," she said with a gentle smile. "Tommy, I want you to know that I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to promise you something I can't deliver, but I am going to ask you to trust me for just a little while. Will you do that?" Tommy nodded immediately, and Michael felt a stab of fear at how quickly his son was opening himself to potential heartbreak. But there was something about this girl, something in her quiet confidence and the way she spoke, directly to Tommy rather than over his head, that gave Michael pause. "1 hour," Sarah said, looking up at Michael. "Give me 1 hour with Tommy. If nothing happens, if he doesn't feel anything different, then you can walk away and never see me again." Michael wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him to grab Tommy's wheelchair and leave immediately. But his son was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen since before the accident, hope mixed with desperate pleading. "Please, Dad," Tommy whispered. "Just 1 hour." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 18 months of disappointments and his son's first real request in all that time. When he opened them, both Tommy and Sarah were watching him expectantly. "1 hour," Michael said finally, his voice rough with reluctance. "But if this is some kind of elaborate con game, if you're planning to ask for money or push some miracle cure, this ends immediately." Sarah nodded solemnly. "I understand. And I promise you, Mr. Harrison, I'm not here to take advantage of you or your son. I'm here because I might be able to help." Michael's blood chilled. He hadn't told her his name. "How do you know who I am?" he demanded. Sarah hesitated for the first time since approaching them. I've seen you in the newspapers, Harrison Industries. You're pretty well known in Chicago." The explanation was reasonable enough, but something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. Michael filed the concern away for later investigation. Right now, his son was looking at him with more animation than he had shown in months, and despite every logical objection, Michael found himself nodding. 1 hour, he repeated firmly. "That's all." Sarah smiled then, and for the first time she looked like the young girl she was, rather than the mysteriously confident child who had approached them with impossible promises. 1 hour is all I need," she said, then turned to Tommy. "Are you ready to try something new?" Tommy's answering smile was the brightest thing Michael had seen in over a year. Chapter 3. The First Spark. Sarah led them to a secluded area of the park, away from the playground and the walking, paths where other families might observe or interrupt. She had chosen a spot beneath a cluster of maple trees, where fallen leaves created a natural carpet of gold and crimson. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches, creating a peaceful atmosphere that seemed removed from the busy city beyond. Michael positioned Tommy's wheelchair carefully, ensuring his son was comfortable while maintaining a clear view of whatever Sarah planned to do. His skepticism remained firmly in place, but he couldn't ignore the transformation in Tommy's demeanor. His son sat forward in his chair, alert and engaged in a way that made Michael's chest tight with both hope and fear. "Tommy," Sarah said, settling cross-legged on the ground in front of his wheelchair, "before we start, I need you to understand something important. What we're going to do isn't like the treatments you've tried before. It's not about machines or medicines or surgeries." Tommy nodded eagerly. "What is it about then?" "It's about remembering," Sarah said simply. "Your body remembers how to walk even if your mind has forgotten how to tell it what to do. We're going to help them talk to each other again." Michael opened his mouth to object to what sounded like New Age nonsense, but something in Sarah's tone stopped him. She wasn't speaking with the false cheer of a charlatan or the desperate enthusiasm of someone trying to sell something. Her voice carried a quiet authority that suggested experience rather than theory. "Can you close your eyes for me, Tommy?" Sarah asked. Tommy glanced at his father, seeking permission. Michael nodded reluctantly, though every muscle in his body remained tense. "Good," Sarah continued as Tommy's eyes fluttered shut. "Now, I want you to think back to before your accident. Can you remember running?" "Yes," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Tell me about it." "What did it feel like?" Tommy's face scrunched in concentration. "It felt like flying, but on the ground. My legs were strong, and I could go anywhere I wanted. I could run up the stairs at home 2 at a time. I could race my friend Jake, and sometimes I'd win." As Tommy spoke, Sarah began to move her hands slowly above his legs, not quite touching but hovering inches away from the fabric of his jeans. Michael watched, torn between skepticism and fascination, as his son described memories of mobility with more animation than he had shown in months. "That's perfect," Sarah said, softly. "Now I want you to try to feel that memory in your legs. Don't try to move them, just try to remember the feeling of wanting to move them." Michael expected nothing to happen. He had watched Tommy undergo countless physical therapy sessions, had seen specialists manipulate his son's unresponsive limbs, had witnessed test after test that showed no neural activity below the point of injury. The medical consensus was unanimous and final. But then something impossible occurred. Tommy's left foot twitched. Michael blinked hard, certain he had imagined it. But Tommy's eyes flew open wide with shock and excitement. "Did you see that?" Tommy gasped, staring down at his foot. "Did you see it move?" Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He had seen it, but his rational mind immediately supplied explanations. Muscle spasms weren't uncommon in spinal cord injuries. Involuntary movements could be caused by a dozen different factors, none of which indicated actual recovery of function. "I saw it," Sarah said calmly, as if she had expected exactly this response. "How did it feel?" Like electricity," Tommy said, his voice filled with wonder. "Like someone plugged me back in." Sarah smiled and looked up at Michael. "This is just the beginning," she said. "What Tommy just experienced is his nervous system starting to remember pathways it thought were lost. It's not magic, Mr. Harrison. It's just science that most doctors don't understand yet." Michael found his voice, though it came out rough with emotion. "That was just a spasm." The doctors said a lot of things," Sarah interrupted gently. "But they don't know everything. Tommy's injury damaged the communication between his brain and his legs, but it didn't destroy it completely. There are always pathways that survive, connections that can be rebuilt if you know how to access them." She turned back to Tommy, whose face was flushed with excitement. "Tommy, I want you to try something else. Close your eyes again, and this time, instead of just remembering running, I want you to imagine sending a message to your right foot. Tell it to move." Tommy squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body straining with concentration. Sarah resumed, her hovering hand movements, this time focusing on his right leg. Michael watched his son's face contort with effort, saw the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. For several minutes, nothing happened. Michael felt the familiar crushing weight of disappointment beginning to settle over him, the same feeling that had followed every failed treatment and dashed hope over the past 18 months. Then, Tommy's right foot moved, not just a twitch, this time, but a deliberate lifting motion that raised his toe several inches off the wheelchair's footrest. The movement lasted only a second, but it was unmistakably voluntary. Tommy's eyes flew open and he let out a sound that was part laugh, part sob. "I did it, Dad. I made it move." Michael stared at his son's foot, his mind reeling. This wasn't a spasm or an involuntary reflex. He had seen Tommy's face during the effort, had witnessed the conscious intention behind the movement. It should have been impossible, yet he had seen it with his own eyes. "How?" Michael whispered, the question directed as much to the universe as to Sarah. "Like I said, it's about connection," Sarah replied. "Tommy's spinal cord injury didn't sever every nerve pathway. Some connections survived, but they got weak from lack of use. Think of it like a muscle that hasn't been exercised in a long time. It's still there, but it needs to be strengthened. She looked at Tommy, who was staring at his feet with a mixture of amazement and fierce determination. The hard part isn't making the connection work once. The hard part is making it work consistently, strengthening it until it becomes natural again. "Can you teach me how to do that?" Tommy asked, his voice urgent with hope. Sarah nodded. "I can try. But it's going to take a lot of work, Tommy. And it's going to hurt sometimes. Your body is going to have to remember things it's been trying to forget. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," Tommy said immediately. "Yes, I'll do anything." Michael felt as if he was standing at the edge of a cliff, with his son already leaping into the void of possibility. Every rational part of his mind screamed warnings about false hope and inevitable disappointment, but he couldn't deny what he had just witnessed. "What exactly are you proposing?" Michael asked Sarah, his businessman's instincts demanding details and terms. "I'd like to work with Tommy regularly," Sarah said. "A few times a week at first, then daily as he gets stronger. It's not going to be quick and it's not going to be easy. But if he's willing to put in the effort, I think we can help him walk again." Michael looked at his son, saw the desperate hope shining in his eyes, and felt the weight of decision crushing down on him. He could say no, could protect Tommy from another potential heartbreak, or he could take the leap with him, could dare to believe that maybe, just maybe, the experts were wrong. "Where would these sessions take place?" Michael asked, the question itself a small surrender to possibility. "I know a place," Sarah said. "Someone who understands this kind of work, someone who won't ask questions or demand credentials." Michael's business instincts flared again. "I'll need to know more about your background, your training, your methods. I'll need references and—" "Dad," Tommy interrupted, reaching out to grasp his father's hand. "Please, I felt something. For the first time since the accident, I felt something in my legs. Can't we just try?" Michael looked down at his son's pleading face, then at Sarah's steady, confident gaze. He thought about the army of specialists who had examined Tommy, the consensus of medical opinion that had declared his case hopeless. Then he thought about the two movements he had just witnessed, impossible but undeniable. "All right," he heard himself saying. "We'll try." Tommy's smile was brighter than the autumn sun filtering through the maple leaves above them. And for the first time in 18 months, Michael allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, miracles were still possible. The hour Sarah had requested was nearly over, but as they prepared to leave the secluded grove, Michael realized that something fundamental had shifted, not just in Tommy's condition, but in the careful equilibrium of grief and resignation that had governed their lives since the accident. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the way things had been. The spark of hope that had been ignited in Tommy's eyes was too bright to extinguish, and Michael found himself willing to fan that flame, even if it meant risking everything they had learned to accept. Chapter 4. Unveiling the Past. 2 weeks had passed since that first encounter in Lincoln Park, and Michael's world had been turned upside down. Sarah's sessions with Tommy were yielding results that defied every medical opinion they had received. His son could now move both feet consistently, and yesterday, for the first time since the accident, Tommy had managed to flex his left knee. The sessions took place in a small clinic on Chicago's South Side, in a neighborhood that Michael's luxury cars had never visited before. Dr. Samuel Roberts, the elderly physician who ran the clinic, had welcomed them without questions or judgment. His facility was nothing like the gleaming medical centers where Tommy had been treated before. The equipment was older, the walls showed wear, and the waiting room furniture had seen better decades. But there was something in Dr. Roberts' eyes, a wisdom and compassion that made Michael feel more hopeful than all the prestigious specialists combined. Progress in cases like Tommy's isn't linear, Dr. Roberts had explained during their first meeting. Some days will be better than others. Some days might feel like setbacks. But what Sarah is doing with him, this combination of visualization, nerve pathway stimulation, and pure determination, I've seen it work before. Now, as Michael watched, Sarah guided Tommy through another session. He found himself studying the girl who had appeared in their lives like some kind of guardian angel. She couldn't be more than 13, yet she worked with a confidence and knowledge that seemed far beyond her years. Her clothes were still simple, though Michael had noticed she now wore new sneakers, a gift from Tommy, who had insisted on buying them with his allowance. "Can you feel the connection getting stronger, Tommy?" Sarah asked, her hands moving in slow, deliberate patterns above his legs. "Yeah," Tommy replied, his eyes closed in concentration. "It's like the signal is getting clearer, less static." Michael marveled at his son's vocabulary for describing his experience. Tommy had developed his own language for the sensations he was rediscovering, speaking of electricity and signals and pathways as if he instinctively understood the neural mechanics of his recovery. "Good," Sarah said. "Now I want you to try something new. Instead of just moving your foot, try to imagine pushing against the ground, like you're trying to stand up." Tommy's face tightened with concentration. Michael watched as his son's entire body seemed to focus on the effort, every muscle straining toward the impossible goal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Tommy's right leg began to straighten, pushing against the footrest of his wheelchair with deliberate force. "I'm doing it!" Tommy gasped, his eyes flying open. "Dad, look! I'm pushing!" Michael felt tears sting his eyes as he watched his son's leg maintain steady pressure against the footrest for nearly 10 seconds before the effort became too much. It was the strongest voluntary movement Tommy had made since the accident, and the progress was undeniable. "That was amazing," Sarah said, her own face glowing with pride. "You're getting so much stronger, Tommy. Pretty soon we're going to try some weight-bearing exercises." As the session wound down and Tommy transferred back into his regular wheelchair, exhausted but exhilarated, Michael found himself alone with Sarah for a few minutes, while Dr. Roberts checked on another patient. "Sarah," Michael said carefully, "I need you to know how grateful I am for what you're doing with Tommy, but I also need to understand more about who you are and where you learned these techniques." Sarah's expression became guarded, the openness that characterized her interactions with Tommy replaced by something more cautious. "I told you, I learned from people who understood that there are different ways to heal." "That's not enough," Michael said firmly but gently. "You're working with my son, helping him in ways that supposedly trained professionals couldn't. I need to know your story." Sarah looked toward the room where Tommy was talking excitedly with Dr. Roberts about his progress. When she turned back to Michael, there was something vulnerable in her expression that made her look her age for the first time. "You really want to know?" she asked quietly. "I do." Sarah took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I was in a car accident. My parents—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "My parents didn't survive. I was in the hospital for months. The doctors said I'd never walk normally again." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "What happened?" "A truck ran a red light," Sarah continued, her voice steady but distant. "The driver was drunk, hit us head-on while we were coming home from my school play. I was in the back seat, so I survived, but my legs were crushed." The clinical way she described the tragedy made Michael's heart ache. He could hear the practiced nature of the explanation, as if she had told this story many times to social workers, doctors, and well-meaning adults who needed to understand her situation. "How did you learn to walk again?" Michael asked softly. "Dr. Roberts," Sarah said simply. "After I aged out of the foster system's immediate care, I ended up here. He didn't have fancy equipment or expensive treatments, but he had patience and he believed in possibilities that other doctors didn't. He taught me that the connection between mind and body is stronger than most people realize. And you've been helping other people since then?" Sarah nodded. "Dr. Roberts has other patients like Tommy, people who were told there was no hope. Sometimes I can help, sometimes I can't, but I always try." Michael felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, but the picture they formed was uncomfortable. "Sarah, the accident that hurt you, do you remember what company the truck driver worked for?" Sarah's face went very still. "Why do you ask?" "Please," Michael said. "I need to know." "Harrison Industries," Sarah said quietly. The driver was making a delivery for one of your warehouses. He'd been drinking after his shift ended, but he was still driving a company truck. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He remembered the case now, though it had been handled by his legal team and insurance company. A tragic accident involving a company vehicle settled quietly with the family's estate. He had never seen the details, never knew there had been. A survivor. You knew, Sarah said, watching his face. You knew who I was when I approached you in the park. No, Michael said quickly. I swear to you I had no idea. The legal department handles these matters. I never saw the details of the case. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. The settlement money was supposed to go into a trust for me, she said finally. But there were complications with the paperwork since I was a minor with no legal guardian. By the time it got sorted out, most of it had gone to administrative fees and legal costs. Michael felt sick. While he had been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to heal his son, the girl who was actually accomplishing that healing had been living in poverty, a victim of his company's negligence and the legal system's indifference. Sarah, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, I am so sorry. I had no idea that our company was responsible. I didn't approach Tommy to get revenge, if that's what you're thinking. Sarah interrupted, and I'm not trying to get money from you. I saw a boy who needed help and I knew I might be able to provide it. That's all. But why? Michael asked. After what happened to your family, why would you want to help us? Sarah looked toward the room where Tommy's laughter could be heard, mixing with Dr. Roberts' gentle voice. Because helping people heal helps me heal too, she said simply. And because Tommy deserves the chance to walk again, regardless of who his father is. The conversation was interrupted by Tommy wheeling himself back into the main area, his face bright with excitement. Dad, Dr. Roberts says that if I keep improving at this rate, I might be able to try standing with support next week. Michael looked at his son's radiant face, then at Sarah, who was smiling with genuine joy at Tommy's progress. The complexity of their situation, the tragic irony that the girl helping his son was a victim of his company's actions, threatened to overwhelm him. But seeing Tommy's happiness, witnessing the hope that had returned to his son's life, Michael knew that whatever guilt and responsibility he carried, whatever amends he needed to make, Ed couldn't interfere with Tommy's recovery. That's wonderful, son, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. You're working so hard, and it's paying off. As they prepared to leave the clinic, Michael caught Sarah's arm gently. We need to talk more about this, he said quietly. About your situation, about what happened to your family, about how I can make things right. Sarah nodded. I know, but not in front of Tommy. He doesn't need to carry the weight of all this history. He needs to focus on getting better. Michael agreed, but as they drove home through the darkening Chicago streets, Tommy chattering excitedly about his progress, while Sarah sat quietly in the back seat, Michael felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had been given an incredible gift. His son was healing, walking back toward a future that had seemed impossible. But that gift had come from someone he had unwittingly wronged, someone who deserved far more than the cruel hand fate had dealt. Somehow, he would have to find a way to make amends for the past while protecting the miraculous present that Sarah had given them. The road ahead was as complex as Tommy's recovery itself, filled with obstacles that couldn't be overcome with money or power, but only with patience, understanding, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about the consequences of his success. Chapter 5. Making Amends. 3 days after learning the truth about Sarah's past, Michael found himself standing in the law offices of Patterson, Briggs & Associates at 7 in the morning, demanding files that his legal team had hoped would remain buried forever. The case file for Sarah Mitchell, he had finally learned her last name, made for devastating reading. Sarah's parents, David and Jennifer Mitchell, had been killed instantly when Harrison Industries delivery driver James Conway ran a red light while intoxicated. Sarah, then 10 years old, had spent 4 months in the hospital with multiple fractures in both legs and a severe spinal injury that doctors predicted would leave her permanently disabled. The settlement had been substantial in theory, but after legal fees, administrative costs, and the complications of an orphaned minor with no immediate family, very little had actually reached Sarah. Michael's hands shook as he read through the medical reports describing Sarah's injuries, her prognosis, and her long road to recovery. The parallels to Tommy's situation were eerie and heartbreaking. While Michael had unlimited resources to pursue every possible treatment for his son, Sarah had recovered from arguably worse injuries with nothing but determination and Dr. Roberts's unconventional methods. "Sir." His assistant Jennifer Walsh appeared in the doorway of his office. "You asked me to remind you about Tommy's appointment at 10. Michael looked up from the files, realizing he had been staring at a photograph of Sarah's parents for the past 20 minutes. David Mitchell had been a high school history teacher, Jennifer an elementary school librarian. They looked like the kind of people who attended PTA meetings and coached Little League, who had probably never imagined their lives would intersect with a corporate empire like Harrison Industries. "Jennifer," Michael said slowly, "I need you to do something for me. I want you to find Sarah Mitchell. She's about 13 now, probably in the foster system or living with Dr. Samuel Roberts on the South Side. I need to know everything about her current situation, where she's living, what she needs, what kind of support she's been receiving." Jennifer made notes on her tablet. "Is this related to a legal matter, sir?" "It's related to doing the right thing," Michael said. 3 years too late, but the right thing nonetheless. An hour later, Michael arrived at Dr. Roberts's clinic to find Tommy already deep in session with Sarah. His son was lying on a treatment table, his legs extended, while Sarah guided him through exercises that would have been impossible just weeks ago. "Try to lift your knee toward your chest, Tommy," Sarah was saying. "Don't worry about how high it goes, just focus on the movement." Michael watched in amazement as Tommy's right leg bent at the knee, lifting several inches off the table. The movement was slow and clearly required enormous effort, but it was controlled and deliberate. "That's incredible," Michael breathed. Tommy turned his head toward his father, his face flushed with exertion but glowing with pride. "Sarah thinks I might be able to try standing next week with the parallel bars, not walking yet, but actually supporting some of my own weight." The possibility seemed miraculous, yet Michael had learned to trust Sarah's assessments. Her predictions about Tommy's progress had been consistently accurate, even when they seemed overly optimistic. "Sarah," Michael said after Tommy had completed his exercises and was resting, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah glanced at Tommy, who was chatting excitedly with Dr. Roberts about the parallel bar exercises. She nodded and followed Michael to a quiet corner of the clinic. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day," Michael began. "About your parents, about the settlement, about everything that happened after the accident." Sarah's expression became wary. "I told you I don't want your pity or your money." "It's not about pity," Michael said firmly. "It's about responsibility. My company was responsible for destroying your family, and then the system failed you when you needed support the most. I can't undo what happened, but I can try to make things right going forward." "What are you suggesting?" Michael took a deep breath. "I want you to come live with us. Tommy and I mean. You could have your own room, your own space, but you'd be part of our family. You'd have everything you need, education, healthcare, stability, and you could continue helping Tommy without worrying about where you're going to sleep or what you're going to eat." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. "You want to adopt me?" "If you're willing," Michael said. "I know it's complicated. I know I'm asking you to trust the man whose company destroyed your original family. But I also know that you've given Tommy something I thought he'd lost forever, hope. And I'd like to give you something you've been without for too long, a real home. What does Tommy think about this?" "I haven't discussed it with him yet. I wanted to talk to you first. But Sarah, I've watched you with my son. You care about him and he cares about you. You're already part of our family in all the ways that matter." Sarah looked across the room at Tommy, who was attempting to flex his ankle under Dr. Roberts' encouraging supervision. "I never had a brother," she said quietly, "and Tommy never had a sister. Maybe you could learn together." "What about school? I haven't been attending regularly since—" She gestured vaguely, indicating the chaos that had been her life since her parents' passing. "We'll figure it out," Michael said. "Private tutors if necessary, or one of Chicago's best schools if you prefer. Whatever you need to catch up and move forward." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, considering his offer. Michael waited, understanding that this decision would reshape not just her life, but all of their lives in ways he couldn't fully predict. "There's something else you should know," Sarah said finally. "About Dr. Roberts, about how I really learned to help people like Tommy." "What do you mean?" "Dr. Roberts lost his license to practice conventional medicine 15 years ago. He was treating patients with experimental therapies that the medical board didn't approve. They said he was giving false hope to people with terminal conditions." Michael felt a chill. "And was he?" "Some of his patients got better," Sarah said simply. "Not all of them, but enough that word got around. People started coming to him when they'd exhausted all other options. He never promised cures, but he offered hope and alternative approaches when conventional medicine had nothing left to give." "Is what he's doing legal?" "It's in a gray area," Sarah admitted. "He's not practicing medicine without a license because he's not technically practicing medicine at all. He's providing wellness coaching, alternative therapy, support services. The treatments that are helping Tommy aren't technically medical procedures." Michael considered this information. Everything Sarah and Dr. Roberts had done for Tommy existed outside the conventional medical system, in spaces where hope and determination mattered more than credentials and clinical trials. "Does this change your offer?" Sarah asked. Michael looked at his son, who was now attempting to wiggle his toes on command, his face screwed up in concentration. Tommy's progress was undeniable, regardless of the unconventional methods being used to achieve it. "No," Michael said firmly. "It doesn't change anything. You've helped my son in ways that conventional medicine couldn't. That's what matters to me." Sarah nodded slowly. "I need to think about your offer. It's a big decision." "Of course. Take all the time you need." "But Michael?" Sarah looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than her 13 years. "Thank you for wanting to make things right, for caring about more than just what I can do for Tommy. That means more than you know." As they rejoined Tommy and Dr. Roberts, Michael felt a mixture of hope and trepidation about the future. The legal and social complications of adopting Sarah would be significant, especially given the circumstances of their connection. But watching her guide Tommy through another exercise, seeing the genuine affection between them, Michael knew he was making the right choice. His empire had been built on calculated risks and strategic decisions, but this wasn't about business. This was about family, about redemption, and about the possibility that sometimes the most broken situations could be rebuilt into something stronger and more beautiful than what had existed before. Tommy's laughter filled the small clinic as he successfully moved his left foot in a way that had been impossible for months. Sarah laughed with him, her face bright with shared joy, and Michael realized that healing, real healing, wasn't just about recovering from physical injuries. Sometimes it was about learning to love again, to trust again, and to believe that the future could be different from the past. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it was about discovering that the person who could help you heal was someone you never expected to find, someone whose own wounds had given them the wisdom to guide others back to wholeness. The conversation about adoption could wait another day. For now it was enough to watch his son continue to recover, to see Sarah smile without the guardedness that usually shadowed her expression, and to believe that they were all exactly where they needed to be. Chapter 6. Walking Toward Tomorrow 6. Months after that first encounter in Lincoln Park, Michael Harrison stood in his living room, watching the most miraculous sight he had ever witnessed. Tommy, his son who had been told he would never walk again, was taking slow, deliberate steps between the parallel bars that had been installed in their home's rehabilitation room. "One more, Tommy," Sarah encouraged, her hands hovering near, him ready to provide support if needed. "You've got this." Tommy's face was intense with concentration, sweat beading on his forehead from the enormous effort each step required. His legs shook with the strain, but they were responding to his commands, carrying him forward one impossible inch at a time. "I'm doing it," Tommy whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I'm actually walking." Michael felt tears streaming down his face as he watched his son complete the length of the parallel bars. It had been a journey measured not in miles, but in millimeters, not in speed, but in determination. Tommy's gait was still unsteady, his endurance limited, but he was walking. The doctors had been wrong. The impossible had become possible. "That was amazing," Sarah said, her own eyes bright with tears of joy. "You've been working so hard and it's paying off." The past 6 months had transformed all of their lives in ways Michael couldn't have imagined. Sarah had moved into their Lakeshore Drive mansion 3 months ago, after the adoption process had been completed, despite numerous legal and bureaucratic obstacles. She had her own wing of the house, decorated in blues and greens that reminded her of the ocean she had never seen, but dreamed of visiting. The adjustment hadn't been without challenges. Michael's household staff had been skeptical of the young girl who had arrived with nothing but a small suitcase and an extraordinary gift for healing. Some of the whispered conversations had been less than kind, questioning Sarah's motives and background. But gradually, as they witnessed her dedication to Tommy's recovery and her genuine care for the family, even the most skeptical staff members had come to respect and love her. Tommy had embraced having a sister with the enthusiasm he brought to everything he truly cared about. He had insisted on teaching Sarah to play chess, despite her protests that she wasn't smart enough for such games. She had quickly proven him wrong, beating him within 2 weeks of learning the rules. In return, she had taught him meditation techniques that helped him focus during his physical therapy sessions. "Dad, watch this," Tommy called out, interrupting Michael's thoughts. Still gripping the parallel bars, Tommy lifted his right foot and took a step without using his hands for balance. For just a moment, he was walking completely independently. Michael's breath caught in his throat. "Tommy, that was incredible. Sarah says that by Christmas I might be able to walk short distances without any support at all," Tommy said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Maybe even run someday." "Let's focus on walking first," Sarah said with a laugh, but Michael could see the hope in her eyes too. If anyone could help Tommy achieve the impossible goal of running again, it would be her. The transformation in Tommy's physical condition had been matched by an equally remarkable change in his emotional state. The quiet, withdrawn boy who had emerged from the accident had been replaced by a confident, determined young man who approached each day with renewed purpose. His recovery had given him not just the use of his legs, but a sense of possibility that extended far beyond physical mobility. "I have some news," Michael announced, settling into a chair where he could watch both of his children, for that's how he had come to think of them. "The adoption papers are finalized. Sarah, as of this morning, you are officially Sarah Harrison." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with surprise and emotion. "Really, it's official?" "It's official," Michael confirmed. "You're legally my daughter now, Tommy's sister, and this is your home for as long as you want it to be." Tommy let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the large room. "I told you Dad would make it happen," he said to Sarah. "Now you really are my sister." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, struggling to find words. "I never thought I'd have a family again," she said quietly. "After my parents." "You'll always have us," Michael said firmly. "Nothing will ever change that." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Roberts, who had become a weekly visitor to their home. The elderly physician had been initially overwhelmed by the luxury of the Harrison mansion, but he had quickly adapted to providing Tommy's care in surroundings far more comfortable than his modest clinic. "How is our patient today?" Dr. Roberts asked, his kind eyes taking in Tommy's position at the parallel bars. "He walked the entire length without hand support for one step," Sarah reported proudly. "His strength and balance are improving every day." Dr. Roberts nodded approvingly. "Remarkable progress. I've been practicing alternative medicine for 40 years, and I've rarely seen such dramatic improvement in a case like Tommy's." "It's whole because of Sarah," Tommy said loyally. She never gave up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself. Michael watched the exchange with deep satisfaction. The integration of Dr. Roberts into their lives had been seamless, and his presence had provided additional validation for Sarah's methods. More importantly, Tommy had benefited from having multiple adults who believed in his ability to recover. Dr. Roberts, Michael said, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your clinic. I'd like to make a proposal. The elderly physician looked up with interest. Oh? I want to fund a proper rehabilitation center for you. State-of-the-art equipment, a full staff, everything you need to help people like Tommy who've been told there's no hope. You could continue your work without worrying about resources or legal complications. Dr. Roberts was quiet for a moment, considering the offer. That's very generous, Michael, but I wouldn't want to compromise the personal approach that makes our methods effective. You wouldn't have to, Michael assured him. This would be your center, run according to your principles. I'd just provide the funding and handle the administrative details. Think of how many more people you could help. Sarah looked up from where she was adjusting Tommy's position at the parallel bars. Dr. Roberts, that sounds amazing. You could help so many people who don't have anywhere else to turn. Like you helped us, Tommy added. Dr. Roberts smiled, his weathered face creasing with warmth. In that case, I accept your offer, Michael, but I have one condition. Name it. I want Sarah to be part of the center when she's older. She has her gift for this work that shouldn't be wasted. With proper training and education, she could help countless people. Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? You think I could do that? I think you could do anything you set your mind to, Michael said. But that's a decision for the future. Right now, you're 13 years old, and your job is to be a kid, go to school, and help your brother continue his recovery. Speaking of which, Sarah said, turning back to Tommy, are you ready to try a few more steps? I think you've got enough strength left for one more round. Tommy nodded eagerly, repositioning himself at the beginning of the parallel bars. Michael watched as his son prepared for another attempt, marveling at the determination that had carried him so far from the broken boy in the wheelchair. As Tommy began his careful progress along the bars, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The accident that had devastated their family had led them to Sarah, whose own tragedy had given her the tools to heal others. The company that had once been Michael's sole focus had become a means of redemption and service. The wealth that had failed to buy Tommy's recovery had found its true purpose in supporting those who needed it most. 10 steps, Sarah counted as Tommy reached the end of the bars. That's a new record. Tommy beamed with pride as he settled back into his wheelchair for a rest. Sarah, do you think I'll be able to walk at your graduation when you finish high school? I think you'll be able to dance at my graduation, Sarah replied with a grin. But you'll have to learn how to dance first. Deal, Tommy said, as long as you teach me. Michael felt his heart swell with love for these two remarkable children who had found their way to each other despite impossible circumstances. Tommy's physical recovery continued to exceed every expectation, but the emotional healing that had taken place in their family was equally miraculous. The silence that had once characterized their relationship had been replaced by laughter, conversation, and shared dreams. The isolation that had followed Tommy's accident had given way to a sense of connection and purpose that extended beyond their immediate family to touch the lives of others who needed hope. You know, Michael said, watching Tommy and Sarah plan their next therapy session. I used to think that success was measured by how much money you could make, how many deals you could close, how much power you could accumulate. And now? Sarah asked. Michael looked at his son, who was explaining to Dr. Roberts his theory about the mental aspects of physical recovery, and at his daughter, who listened with the kind of attention that made people feel truly heard. Now, I know that success is measured by how much love you can give, how much healing you can facilitate, and how much hope you can restore in the world, he said. Everything else is just details. As the afternoon session concluded, and they prepared for dinner, Michael realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the solitary satisfaction of business achievements or the hollow pleasure of material possessions, but the deep contentment that came from being surrounded by people you loved and who loved you in return. Tommy would continue to grow stronger, would eventually walk without assistance, and might even run again someday. Sarah would finish her education, become a healer in her own right, and help countless others find their way back to wholeness. And Michael would continue to be amazed by the capacity of the human spirit to overcome tragedy and find joy in the most unexpected places. The girl who had once approached them in Lincoln Park with an impossible promise had kept her word in ways that went far beyond physical healing. She had restored not just Tommy's ability to walk, but their family's ability to love, to hope, and to believe in miracles that couldn't be bought or sold, only given freely from one heart to another. As they headed to dinner, Tommy walking slowly, but steadily between his father and sister, Michael knew that this was just the beginning of their story together. The future stretched ahead of them, filled with possibilities that would have seemed impossible just months ago, but which now felt as natural and inevitable as Sarah's quiet confidence and Tommy's determined smile. Sometimes, Michael reflected, the greatest miracles weren't the ones that defied the laws of nature, but the ones that restored faith in the power of human connection to heal what seemed beyond repair. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those miracles came disguised as ordinary people who possessed the extraordinary gift of helping others find their way back to themselves. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Michael, Tommy, and Sarah has touched your hearts and reminded you of the incredible power of love, determination, and second chances. This tale of healing and redemption shows us that sometimes the most broken situations can become the foundation for something beautiful and strong. The journey of the Harrison family proves that miracles aren't always supernatural events, but, rather, the result of people who refuse to give up on each other, who see potential where others see only limitation, and who understand that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we give away. If this story has moved you, we invite you to join our community of listeners who believe in the power of hope and human connection. Please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to help us share these inspiring stories with others who might need to hear them. Every day we bring you new tales that explore the complexity of life, the strength of the human spirit, and the possibility of transformation even in the darkest circumstances. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Tommy's recovery, Sarah's incredible journey, and Michael's path to redemption. Share your own stories of healing and hope in the comments below. Your experiences might inspire our next story or provide comfort to someone who needs to know they're not alone in their struggles. Don't miss our upcoming stories about families who discover that love can overcome any obstacle, about second chances that change everything, and about the everyday heroes who make miracles happen through their compassion and dedication. Subscribe now and become part of a community that believes in the power of storytelling to heal, inspire, and transform lives. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until next time.